There is a photograph of England in the early years of the century. Gas lamps glowing amber against fog, horses pulling milk carts over cobblestone, and somewhere in that pale light, a boy being raised by people paid to care for him. His parents are in India, administering an empire that stretches across maps and red ink. The child stays behind, moved between relatives and boarding houses, learning early that affection is something rationed, something earned through good behavior and quiet compliance. Alan Turing is born on June 23rd, 1912, in a nursing home in Paddington, London. His father is a civil servant in the Indian Civil Service. His mother follows the colonial pattern: summers in England, winters in the warmth of Madras, a life split between duty and domesticity. The boys, Alan and his older brother John, are left behind. Not abandoned, precisely, but not kept either. They are loved from a distance, raised by a rotation of governesses and host families, shuffled between households that are never quite home. The rooms Alan inhabits in childhood have a particular quality: high ceilings, dark furniture that smells of beeswax, windows that rattle in their frames when wind comes across the garden. He learns to occupy himself in these spaces, counting the flowers on the wallpaper, arranging his toy soldiers in precise geometric formations, constructing elaborate narratives for himself, since there is no one else to play with. There is comfort in patterns. Numbers do not leave. They do not board ships for distant colonies. They remain consistent, predictable, loyal in their way. At school, first at Hazelhurst Preparatory School, he is noticed for all the wrong reasons. His handwriting is atrocious, sprawling across pages with no regard for lines or margins. He cannot spell. He shows no aptitude for Latin or French, the markers of an educated gentleman. But he can do sums in his head that baffle the teachers. He becomes obsessed with maps, with how things work, with taking clocks apart to understand their mechanisms. The headmaster's reports are bemused, concerned. Bright, certainly, but peculiar. Difficult to place. At 13, he is sent to Sherborne School in Dorset, a public school in the English sense, which is to say, private, expensive, ancient, designed to produce a particular type of man. The school rises from grey stone like something carved from duty itself, all Gothic arches and cold corridors, and the persistent smell of boiled vegetables and carbolic soap. Boys in identical uniforms move in formations through hallways that echo with their footsteps. Here, conformity is the highest virtue. Team sports build character. Classical education refines the mind. Deviation is noticed immediately, corrected through mockery, through punishment, through the subtle and not so subtle enforcement of acceptable behavior. And Alan is different in ways he cannot hide, and would not know how to hide, even if he wanted to. He arrives on the first day by bicycle, having ridden 60 miles from Southampton, because a general strike has halted the trains. 60 miles. The newspapers find it amusing. This odd boy pedaling through the countryside to reach school on time. His fellow students find it weird. They find everything about him weird. The way he stammers when nervous. The way he gets lost in thought mid-conversation, drifting away into internal calculations. The way he runs with his arms held at odd angles, graceless but determined. The masters try to shape him, make him write lines, punish him for poor handwriting, for inattention during prayers, for asking questions that derail the lesson. But you cannot beat curiosity out of someone. You can only make them learn to hide it. And Alan is not good at hiding. He reads Einstein's papers on relativity when he is 15, working through the mathematics on his own, because no one at Sherborne is teaching it. He conducts chemistry experiments in his study, creating small explosions and terrible smells. He is lonely, but does not know he is lonely. Loneliness requires a baseline of connection, and he has so rarely experienced that baseline that he cannot measure its absence. Then he meets Christopher Morcom. Christopher is a year older, already marked as exceptional. He has won prizes in mathematics and science. He is interested in astronomy and the new physics and the same invisible architectures that fascinate Alan. They begin to talk, tentatively at first, then with increasing excitement as they realize they speak the same language. Not Latin or Greek, but the language of ideas, of problems worth solving, of the universe as something explicable through mathematics. They exchange letters during holidays. Alan's handwriting is still terrible, but Christopher can read it. They work through problems together in the library, while afternoon sun cuts geometric shapes across wooden tables, dust motes drifting in the light like small planets. They debate whether life is purely mechanical, whether consciousness is just complex chemistry, whether there might be something beyond the physical that science hasn't yet explained. For the first time in his life, Alan experiences what it means to be understood, not tolerated, not pitied, not studied as an oddity. Understood. It is 1930. Alan is 17. He is beginning to understand certain things about himself. Inclinations, desires, the particular quality of his affection for Christopher. He does not have language for it yet. The language exists. Invert, degenerate, words heavy with legal and medical condemnation, but he does not think of himself in those terms. He only knows that Christopher's presence makes the world more bearable, that the thought of disappointing Christopher is worse than any punishment Sherborne can devise, that this friendship, or whatever it is becoming, matters in a way nothing else has mattered. In February 1930, Christopher becomes ill. Tuberculosis, contracted from infected cow's milk, a mundane contamination, bacterial chance. The body betrayed by something as ordinary as breakfast. He declines rapidly. Alan, at school, does not know how serious it is until the telegram arrives. Christopher Morcom died yesterday. Stop. Funeral arrangements to follow. Stop. The chapel service is conducted with the usual platitudes about young promise cut short, about God's mysterious plans, about how the best are taken earliest. Alan sits in the pew and feels the world reveal itself as fundamentally unreliable. Love, even the modest, careful love, between two schoolboys interested in mathematics, offers no protection. The universe does not intervene. It does not care about exceptional minds or unfulfilled potential, or the cruelty of bovine tuberculosis. It simply proceeds according to physical law, indifferent to the meanings we assign to events. In the months after, Alan cannot stop thinking about where the mind goes. Christopher's brain contained thoughts, memories, the solution to problems they were working on together. Where does that information go when the neurons cease firing? Is it simply lost, erased like chalk from a blackboard? Or does consciousness persist somehow, encoded in forms we don't yet understand? He reads voraciously. Quantum mechanics, relativity, the works of Eddington, who suggests that observer and observed cannot be separated, that consciousness might play a fundamental role in physical reality. He writes long letters to Christopher's mother, Mrs. Morcom, trying to work through his grief by converting it into philosophical questions. If matter and energy are interchangeable, might consciousness also convert into something else? If electrons can exist in superposition, might minds exist in states we cannot measure? These are the questions of someone trying to reverse death through mathematics. These are the questions of someone learning that some equations have no solution, that some losses cannot be computed away, that the heart is not subject to logical proof. But he keeps working. What else is there? The problems remain even when the person you wanted to share them with is gone. The numbers still need solving. The universe still requires understanding. And work, at least, does not die. Work does not leave. Work is the one constant in a world that has proven itself treacherous. He graduates from Sherborne without particular distinction. His final report notes his brilliance in mathematics, but his general unorthodoxy in everything else. He has no prospects, no connections, no charm to smooth his way. But he has test scores good enough for Cambridge, and Cambridge accepts peculiar boys if they're brilliant enough. In October 1931, Alan arrives at King's College to study mathematics. The college sits beside the River Cam, all medieval stone and careful lawns, punts drifting past willow trees that trail their branches into the water. Here, eccentricity is not just tolerated but somewhat expected. Mathematicians are allowed to be odd. The pressure to conform is lighter, though never absent. And for the first time, Alan is surrounded by people who care about the same abstractions he cares about, who can follow his reasoning, who argue back with equal passion about Gödel's incompleteness, theorems, or the foundations of set theory. He thrives in his way. He joins the Moral Sciences Club, debating philosophy and logic. He rows badly for his college. He runs cross-country through the Cambridgeshire fens, pushing his body to exhaustion while his mind works through proofs. He makes friends, though friendship for Alan always has a quality of adjacency rather than intimacy. He is present without being fully there, participating without quite connecting, and he begins to understand the shape of his desires more clearly. There are certain men, students, friends, toward whom his feelings extend beyond intellectual admiration. It is illegal, of course, dangerous, the kind of thing that ends careers and lands men in prison. But it is also what he is, and Alan has never been good at pretending to be something he's not. Cambridge in the 1930s exists in a strange bubble. The world outside is anxious, depression, unemployment, fascism rising across Europe. Inside the colleges, life continues with a kind of willful abstraction. Sherry parties, formal dinners, debates about Wittgenstein's latest pronouncement, the dons moving through ancient courtyards in their gowns, discussing ideas that seem to have no connection to the world, where hunger marches happen and borders are closing. Alan, as always, is more interested in the ideas than the politics, but the ideas are becoming urgent. Cambridge in the mid-1930s, spires against cloud, bicycles leaning against stone walls, long scarves trailing from undergraduates hurrying to lectures. In seminar rooms that smell of chalk dust and pipe smoke, young men gather to debate the foundations of mathematics. The field is in crisis, a productive crisis, the kind that births new disciplines. In 1931, Kurt Gödel published his incompleteness theorems, proving that any consistent mathematical system, complex enough to include arithmetic, must contain statements that are true, but unprovable within that system. It is a devastating result. David Hilbert's program, the grand dream of reducing all mathematics to mechanical procedure, to definite methods that could settle any mathematical question, lies in elegant ruins. Mathematics, it turns out, cannot fully explain itself. Truth exceeds proof. The question hanging in the air: what can be computed? What problems can be solved by following fixed rules? Alan attends Max Newman's lectures on the foundations of mathematics in 1935. Newman presents the Entscheidungsproblem, the decision problem, posed by Hilbert. Is there a definite method, an algorithm, that can determine whether any given mathematical statement is provable? Can we mechanize mathematical reasoning? The problem lodges in Alan's mind like a seed. He goes running through the Cambridgeshire meadows, thinking. He lies in the grass at Grantchester, watching clouds move thinking. The problem is about mechanics, about what a mechanical process can and cannot do. So, what is a mechanical process? He imagines a person with infinite paper and infinite time, following fixed rules, a clerk, a computer. That's what they call such people, women mostly, who sit in offices calculating logarithm tables and astronomical charts by hand, working through long columns of numbers with mechanical precision. But strip away the humanity. Strip away everything except the essential process. What remains? A machine that reads symbols, a machine that writes symbols, a machine that moves along a tape, one square at a time, changing state according to instructions. The current symbol, and if the current state, determine the next action. Write a symbol, erase a symbol, move left, move right, halt. That's all. An absurdly simple model. A child's toy described in mathematical notation. But once conceived, the Turing Machine, though he will never call it that, refuses to let go. Alan begins to see that this simple device, properly instructed, can carry out any definite method, any algorithm. Any mechanical procedure can be reduced to reading, writing, and moving along a tape. It is an outrageous claim. It is also, he becomes convinced, true. He works through the implications during the long Cambridge winter of 1936. The gas fire hissing in his rooms at King's. Notebooks filling with diagrams, tape squares, state tables, machine configurations. Outside, frost on the windows. Inside, a revolution in notation. If every definite method can be reduced to a Turing machine, and if some problems cannot be solved by any Turing machine, then those problems have no definite method. They are undecidable. The Entscheidungsproblem itself is undecidable. There is no algorithm that can determine the truth of every mathematical statement. Hilbert's dream is impossible, not because mathematicians haven't been clever enough, but because the universe has fundamental limits. Certainty has borders. But there is something else, something more extraordinary. Alan describes a universal machine, a machine that can read the description of any other machine and simulate it. One machine to contain all possible machines. Feed it the right tape, the right program, and it becomes a different machine. It is a computer in the modern sense, though the word still means a person who computes. He writes the paper in a fever of concentration. On computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. The title is modest, deliberately dry. Inside, it contains the theoretical foundation for every computer that will ever exist. He submits it to the London Mathematical Society in May 1936. Then he learns that Alonzo Church at Princeton has independently proven the undecidability of the Entscheidungsproblem using lambda calculus, a different notation for the same deep truth. There is a moment of disappointment, but Church's approach is more abstract, harder to grasp intuitively. Alan's machine concept is concrete. You can visualize it. You can, in principle, build it. The paper is published. A handful of mathematicians read it with attention. Church himself recognizes its importance, the clarity of its formulation. Newman understands immediately what Alan has achieved. But to most readers, if they engage with it at all, it seems like an elegant answer to an obscure question in mathematical logic. No one speaks of revolution. No one predicts computer science as a field, silicon chips, the internet. No one imagines that this abstract paper about mechanical computation will become the blueprint for a transformed world. Except Alan sees it. Not in detail. He cannot predict smartphones or search engines. But he sees the shape of it. Machines that think, or at least machines that perform tasks we associate with thinking. intelligence as mechanical process, mind as algorithm. The idea is there, waiting for the world to catch up. Church invites him to Princeton to pursue doctoral work. In September 1936, Alan boards a ship for America. The Atlantic crossing takes a week. He stands on deck, watching the water, thinking about machines and minds, and whether there's truly a difference in principle. England recedes behind him, its careful hierarchies, its assumptions about class and education, and the proper way to be. America, he's been told, is different, louder, more direct, less constrained by tradition. Princeton in 1936 is smaller than Cambridge, newer, more deliberately impressive. The graduate college looks like a Gothic cathedral transplanted to New Jersey. The mathematics department is brilliant. Church, von Neumann, Einstein visible around campus, walking between buildings, lost in thought. Alan attends seminars, extends his work on computability, begins to see connections between logic and electronic circuits. He builds things with his hands, a small machine that multiplies binary numbers, constructed from relays and switches. It is crude, temperamental, prone to jamming, but it works, it computes. He returns to his rooms with machine oil under his fingernails, the smell of solder on his clothes, satisfied in a way pure theory never quite satisfies. There is something deeply pleasing about making abstractions physical. He goes running along New Jersey roads. The American landscape is flatter, more open than England. Long straight roads through farmland, sky huge overhead. He runs until thought dissolves into breath and motion, until the body becomes its own kind of machine, reliable and simple. He writes home to his mother, dutiful letters that reveal little of what he's actually thinking. He makes awkward attempts at social life, attending department parties where he stands slightly apart, nursing a drink, watching conversations happen around him. He is not unpopular exactly, just separate, always separate. In 1937, he completes his PhD. His dissertation extends the work on computability, exploring ordinal logics and intuitionistic mathematics. Church approves. Alan is offered a fellowship to stay at Princeton another year. He considers it. America has been good to him in its way, less judgmental, more willing to let oddness pass without comment. But then, the letters from England change in tone. Newman writes about growing concerns in Europe, Hitler's Germany, the likelihood of war. There is work that needs doing, Newman suggests. Work that requires exactly Alan's kind of mind. Cryptographic work, secret work, important work. In July 1938, Alan sails back to England. He does not know, cannot know, that he is leaving behind the possibility of a different life. That if he had stayed in America, he might have avoided what's coming. But he does not stay. He goes home to a country preparing for darkness, to work that will consume him for years and then vanish into classification, to a future that will require everything he can give and then punish him for giving it. The ship carries him back across the Atlantic. The water is gray, restless. War is coming. And Alan, who has spent his life in abstractions, is about to discover what it means when abstractions collide with history. Bletchley Park, in autumn 1939, is not impressive. An ugly Victorian mansion, red brick, too many chimneys, ornate in ways that announce money without taste, set in 50 acres of unremarkable Buckinghamshire countryside. The grounds are being hastily transformed. Wooden huts rising from foundation trenches, cables being laid underground, security fences going up. To passing motorists, it might be an administrative facility. Something to do with the war effort, but nothing dramatic. No one would guess that it will become the center of British intelligence, the place where messages are transformed from meaningless static into actionable intelligence that will alter the course of history. Alan arrives in September, just after war is declared. He has been coming here since March for training, learning about the Enigma machine, the German encryption device that scrambles messages through a series of rotating wheels, plug board connections, thousands of possible configurations that change daily. The Polish cryptanalysts have made remarkable progress, sharing their methods with British intelligence before their country is invaded. But the Germans are constantly improving the system, adding complexity, changing procedures. Breaking Enigma is not a problem you solve once. It is a problem you solve every day, over and over, racing against time and German ingenuity. The mansion becomes administration and housing. The real work happens into the huts, temporary wooden structures thrown up too quickly, from too little material, uninsulated, heated by single stoves, that do little against the British winter. Hut 8 is where Alan will spend most of the war, leading the team attacking German naval Enigma, the U-boat communications that are most critical and most difficult to break. He arrives wearing a shabby sports jacket with leather elbow patches, no tie, hair uncombed, immediately noticeable. The other cryptanalysts are mostly Cambridge and Oxford men, but even among that eccentric population, Alan stands out. He stammers when nervous, which is most of the time in social situations. He goes silent mid-conversation, clearly working through some problem in his head, emerging minutes later to finish a sentence as though no time has passed. He chains his coffee mug to a radiator in Hut 8 because petty theft is rampant and he cannot be bothered with social negotiations about property rights. But when he focuses on Enigma, something changes. The nervous mannerisms quiet. The social awkwardness recedes. He sees the problem with absolute clarity, not just the mathematical structure of the cipher, but the human errors that make it vulnerable. The Germans are excellent at cryptography, but they follow procedures, and procedures create patterns, and patterns can be exploited. The challenge is staggering. Each day, every German military unit receives new Enigma settings, which wheels to use, what order to place them, where to set them initially, how to configure the plug board. Without these settings, encrypted messages are essentially random. The number of possible combinations runs into the billions. No human team could check them all before the settings change again at midnight. But humans make mistakes. They send weather reports at predictable times, using predictable formats. They begin messages with standard military phrases. They sometimes encrypt the same message on different settings. They are human, and human patterns are exploitable. Alan designs the bomb, named after the Polish bomba, cryptologiczna, but vastly more sophisticated. It is an electromechanical device that tests possible wheel positions by looking for logical contradictions. If a message contains a known phrase, a crib in code-breaking terminology, the bomb can eliminate impossible settings, narrowing billions of combinations to dozens of plausible options that humans can then test. The first prototype arrives at Bletchley Park in March 1940. It is loud. Relays clicking in rhythmic patterns, drums rotating, a sound like mechanical thought made audible. The Wrens, Women's Royal Naval Service members who operate the machines, work in shifts, feeding impossible solutions, monitoring the drums, noting when the machine stops. Most stops are false positives, but occasionally, rarely, the impossible happens. Encrypted text resolves into German words, orders, coordinates, U-boat positions in the North Atlantic. It is not glamorous. It is shift work in unheated huts, the smell of oil and electric motors, checking endless reams of decrypt attempts, adjusting settings on temperamental machines that jam and overheat and require constant maintenance. The work is tedious, maddening, punctuated by brief moments of success that might mean convoys saved, ships that don't sink, sailors who survive another day. The contribution of Bletchley Park will not be understood for decades. The work is classified under the Official Secrets Act. Everyone who works there signs documents, promising never to discuss what they did, whom they worked with, what they learned. The victories attributed to conventional intelligence or luck. Certainly not to mathematicians reading German mail. Even after the war, the secrecy will continue. Decades will pass before the full scope of Bletchley's achievement becomes public. Alan spends the war years in a strange liminal space. He is crucial to the war effort. His techniques are saving lives, enabling military operations, providing Churchill with intelligence that changes strategic decisions. But he cannot tell anyone why he matters. He cannot explain what he does. When people ask about his war service, he deflects, mumbles something vague about Foreign Office work, changes the subject, and beneath the secrecy about his work lies another secrecy. He is homosexual in a country where homosexuality is criminal, working alongside people who would recoil if they knew, in an organization that would dismiss him if discovered. Security concerns, they would say. Blackmail vulnerability. Moral character. The language of exclusion dressed in the rhetoric of necessity. He forms friendships at Bletchley, particularly with Joan Clark, a brilliant mathematician assigned to Hut 8. She understands the work. She keeps up with his thinking. They share a particular kind of loneliness. Though its sources differ, she, a woman in a field that barely acknowledges women's intellectual existence, he, a homosexual man in a society that criminalizes his nature. In 1941, he proposes marriage. She accepts, knowing about his inclinations, hoping perhaps that affection and shared work might be enough. It is not enough. He breaks the engagement within months. He cannot pretend, cannot sustain the performance of heterosexual normalcy, even for someone he genuinely cares about. Joan takes it with grace. They remain friends, colleagues, allies, in the work that continues regardless of personal complications. At night, when the shift ends and the other cryptanalysts head to the local pub or their billets, Alan runs through the Buckinghamshire countryside, past hedgerows and empty fields, running until thought dissolves into breath and motion. Sometimes he wears his gas mask because pollen triggers his allergies, and he sees no reason to suffer for appearances. Locals report seeing a strange figure jogging past at odd hours, masked, running with peculiar arm movements, clearly mad, but harmlessly so. The war grinds on. 1941, and the Battle of the Atlantic reaches crisis point. U-boats sinking merchant ships faster than they can be replaced. Britain's survival depended on convoys making it across the ocean with food and material. Breaking naval Enigma becomes desperately urgent. Alan and his team work 20-hour shifts, living on tea and cigarettes, and the knowledge that every hour's delay means ships sinking. February 1942. Disaster. The Germans introduce a new version of naval Enigma, with 4 wheels instead of 3, exponentially increasing the possible combinations. For nearly a year, Bletchley is locked out of U-boat communications. The Atlantic convoys suffer catastrophic losses. Churchill later writes that the U-boat threat is the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. Alan and his team redesign the bombs, build 4-wheel versions, develop new statistical methods for attacking the cipher. It is mathematical warfare, abstract, but with concrete consequences measured in tons of shipping sunk. Sailors drowned, oil that never reaches England's shores. In December 1942, they break back into naval Enigma. The tide begins to turn. The work extends beyond pure cryptanalysis. Alan becomes interested in speech encryption, working on a project called Delilah, a system for scrambling voice communications. He collaborates with engineers at Dollis Hill, learning about electronics and hardware design, translating his theoretical knowledge into practical circuits. The project is never deployed, but the work deepens his understanding of how to make machines do things previously considered exclusively human. He thinks about machine intelligence. During breaks, he discusses with colleagues whether machines might one day play chess, compose music, translate languages. Most dismiss it as fantasy. Machines are tools, they argue. Calculators, nothing more. They do what they're programmed to do and nothing else. But Alan, who has spent years watching machines find patterns in apparently random noise, who has seen how mechanical processes can simulate thinking when properly designed, believes otherwise. Not now, not soon, but eventually. The boundaries between machine and mind are not as rigid as people assume. In 1945, the war ends. Germany surrenders. The code-breaking operation winds down. The bombs are destroyed or repurposed, most broken up for scrap, a few kept for continued security work that remains classified. Bletchley Park empties. The mathematicians and linguists and chess champions scatter back to universities and civilian life, carrying secrets they cannot share, friendships they cannot explain, knowledge of their own significance that they must keep silent about for decades. Alan signs additional official secrets documents. He is forbidden from discussing his war work, ever, with anyone. The penalties are severe: prison, professional ruin, prosecution for treason. When people ask what he did during the war, he learns to say nothing interesting. Civil service work, administration, nothing worth discussing. But in his mind, he carries forward the question that has been growing throughout the war years. Now that we know machines can do this, can break codes, can process information, can follow complex logical rules, what else might they do? What are the limits of mechanical intelligence? The war is over. Thousands are dead. Cities are rubble. Europe is being carved into zones of occupation. And Alan Turing, who helped save countless lives through work no one can acknowledge, thinks, now we can build it properly. Now we can create the universal machine. Not just in theory, but in physical reality. Now the future can actually begin. The National Physical Laboratory sits in Teddington, southwest London, a complex of brick buildings and laboratories where British scientists work on standards, measurements, the practical foundations of industrial society. It is respectable, established, funded by the government, but run with academic autonomy. In autumn 1945, Alan accepts a position here as a temporary senior principal scientific officer with a mandate, design an electronic computer. The war has proven that electronic computation is possible. The Americans built ENIAC, Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, a massive machine of vacuum tubes and cables that can calculate artillery trajectories faster than humans. But ENIAC is not programmable in the modern sense. To solve a different problem, you have to physically rewire it, changing plug connections and switch settings. It is powerful but inflexible, a calculator rather than a computer in Alan's sense. Alan proposes something different, something revolutionary. The automatic computing engine, ACE, a stored program computer, where the instructions are held in memory alongside the data, where programs can be loaded and changed without rewiring anything, where one machine can become many machines simply by loading different software. It is his 1936 paper made physical, the universal machine realized in electronics. His proposal document, submitted in early 1946, runs to over 50 pages of detailed technical specifications. circuit diagrams, memory architectures, instruction sets, programming methods. It is astonishingly comprehensive, anticipating concepts that won't become standard for years. Subroutines, the separation of hardware and software. The idea of storing programs in memory rather than fixed circuitry. Reading the proposal today is like receiving mail from the future. Everything is there. The logical structure of what will become the modern computer, described with precision and clarity by someone who has thought through not just the theory, but the engineering realities of implementation. The administrators at NPL are not sure what to make of it. It is brilliant, certainly, but also overwhelming. The scale of ambition is daunting. The proposed machine would require thousands of vacuum tubes, delay lines for memory, electronic circuits that need to be designed and tested and manufactured. The cost is substantial. The risks are significant. What if it doesn't work? What if the tubes fail too frequently? What if the whole concept is flawed? They form committees. They request clarifications. They bring in outside consultants to assess feasibility. They worry about budget allocations and personnel management and whether the mathematics division should really be undertaking engineering projects of this magnitude. Alan tries to explain, struggling against the limitations of his own communication style. This will not be merely a calculator. This will be a machine that can simulate any other machine. Give it the right program, and it can calculate artillery trajectories. Give it a different program, and it can play chess, compose music, translate languages, process business accounts, analyze scientific data. It is a universal tool, a mechanical mind waiting to be taught. The engineers at NPL look skeptical. They are practical men who work with concrete tolerances and heat dissipation, and the actual behavior of electronic components under load. They know how often vacuum tubes fail, how difficult it is to synchronize thousands of circuit elements, how theory and practice diverge. This mathematician, however brilliant, seems to have limited appreciation for engineering realities. The meetings drag on through 1946 and into 1947. Memos accumulate. Progress is measured in increments that feel like stasis. Components are ordered, then delayed. Staff are hired, then reassigned. Alan grows frustrated with the bureaucracy, the endless discussions about details that seem obvious to him, but require committee approval. He is not good at institutional politics, not good at patient explanation, not good at concealing his irritation when progress stalls for reasons that seem arbitrary. Meanwhile, parallel efforts are proceeding elsewhere. In America, John von Neumann and his team at Princeton are designing their own stored program computer, building on similar principles. In Manchester, Max Newman, Alan's former mentor from Cambridge, is setting up a computing laboratory with funding from the Royal Society. Newman recruits F.C. Williams and Tom Kilburn, engineers who have been working on cathode ray tube memory during the war. They aim to build something smaller, simpler, less ambitious than ACE, but achievable in shorter time frame. Alan visits Manchester occasionally, sees the work progressing, feels the particular disappointment of someone whose prophecy is being fulfilled by others, in compromised form, without full understanding of the implications. But he also feels something else, relief. At least someone is building it. At least the machines are becoming real, rather than remaining theoretical. On June 21st, 1948, the Manchester Baby, officially the Manchester Small-Scale Experimental Machine, successfully runs its first program. It is modest, finding the highest proper factor of a number. The calculation takes 52 minutes. The result is correct. It is the first stored program electronic computer to actually work, to execute software held in memory, to embody the principles Alan described in 1936 and refined in his ACE proposal. Alan is not there for the first run. He reads about it afterward. The newspapers barely notice, a small item in the technical press. Nothing that reaches public consciousness. But to those who understand what has happened, it is a threshold crossed. The universal machine exists. The future has arrived, at least in prototype form. In May 1948, before the Manchester baby runs, Alan accepts a position at the University of Manchester as Deputy Director of the Computing Laboratory. He leaves NPL. The ACE project will continue without him, eventually producing a working machine in 1950. Years late, smaller than originally envisioned, less elegant than it might have been. But it works, it computes. It joins the handful of electronic stored program computers operating in the world. Manchester in 1948 is industrial, gritty, still bearing scars from wartime bombing. The university's computing facility is basic, a couple of rooms in a Victorian building. The Manchester machine taking up much of the space, cooling fans running constantly, cathode ray tubes glowing green in the dimness. Alan is given an office, a salary, and freedom to pursue whatever interests him. Newman understands how to work with brilliant, difficult people. Give them space, give them problems. Don't expect conventional productivity. Alan writes programs, by hand, on paper, long columns of binary instructions that must be translated to punch tape and fed into the machine. He develops a programming system for the Manchester machine, creating one of the first assemblers, a program that translates human-readable instructions into machine code. It is tedious, painstaking work. Errors in programming produce nonsensical results. Debugging means studying pages of output, tracing logical errors through hundreds of instructions, rebuilding the program step by step. But when a program works, when the machine successfully executes a complex calculation, producing results that match predictions, there is a satisfaction that never quite fades. The abstract made concrete. Thought translated into electrical impulses moving through circuits. Mind and machine converging. And Alan begins to think seriously about what these machines might become. The computer room at Manchester University smells of warm electronics and machine oil. Cooling fans hum constantly. The cathode ray tubes cast green light that makes everyone look slightly unwell. Alan sits at a desk covered with printouts, long strips of paper, perforated with holes. The physical embodiment of programs and data. He is working on a chess program, trying to teach the machine to play a game that seems to require intuition, strategy, the ability to evaluate positions that can't be reduced to simple calculation. The program plays badly. It makes legal moves, but has no sense of position, no understanding of threat or opportunity. A novice human player can beat it easily, but it plays, it executes the rules. Given enough refinement, enough complexity, might it eventually play well? Might it develop something that looks like strategy? This question, whether machines can think, whether they might display intelligence indistinguishable from human intelligence, has been growing in Alan's mind for years. Since Cambridge, since the Turing Machine paper, since watching Bombay's process information, in ways that seemed almost thoughtful. Now, with working computers, the question becomes urgent, practical, worth serious investigation. In October 1950, Alan publishes a paper in the philosophy journal, Mind, titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence. It opens with directness, unusual in academic writing. I propose to consider the question, can machines think? Then immediately he pivots. The question itself is poorly formed. Thinking is vague, subjective, freighted with philosophical assumptions about consciousness and souls and inner experience. Asking whether machines truly think is like asking whether submarines truly swim. The answer depends on definitions, not observations. We need a better question, a clearer test. So he proposes the imitation game. Imagine a scenario. A human interrogator communicates via text with two hidden participants, one human, one machine. The interrogator asks questions, receives typed responses, and must determine which participant is which. The human tries to help the interrogator. The machine tries to convince the interrogator it is human. If the machine succeeds, if it can fool the interrogator, a significant percentage of the time, does that not demonstrate intelligence in any meaningful operational sense? It is characteristic of Alan's approach. Pragmatic, focused on behavior, rather than metaphysics, unconcerned with questions of genuine consciousness or authentic understanding. Intelligence is as intelligence does. If something walks like thought and talks like thought and responds appropriately to novel situations like thought, perhaps the distinction between real and simulated intelligence matters less than philosophers assume. The paper anticipates objections systematically. 9 common arguments against machine intelligence, each carefully addressed. The theological objection. Thinking is a function of the immortal soul. God gave souls only to humans, therefore only humans can think. Alan's response is gentle but firm. This places limits on divine omnipotence. If God can create souls, presumably he can give them to whatever beings he chooses, including artificial ones. And in any case, theological arguments should not constrain empirical investigation. The heads in the sand objection. The consequences of machines thinking would be too dreadful. Therefore, we hope and believe it cannot happen. Alan dismisses this as wishful thinking, masquerading as argument. The universe does not arrange itself according to our preferences. The mathematical objection. Gödel's incompleteness. Theorems prove that formal systems have limitations. Machines are formal systems. Therefore, machines have limitations that humans don't share. Alan points out that humans also make mistakes, also have limitations. We don't know that human cognition escapes Gödel's constraints, and in any case, limitations don't preclude intelligence. They just define its boundaries. The argument from consciousness. Machines might simulate thought, but cannot truly experience it. They cannot feel joy or grief, cannot appreciate beauty, cannot have authentic inner life. Alan's position is essentially behaviorist. We have no access to anyone else's inner experience. We infer consciousness in other humans from their behavior. If machines behave indistinguishably from conscious beings, what grounds do we have for denying them consciousness besides prejudice? He works through each objection with patience and logical rigor, never dismissing concerns, but showing how they rest on assumptions that don't withstand scrutiny. The paper is not claiming machines currently think. It is claiming that machine intelligence is possible, in principle, likely within decades, and that most objections stem from anthropocentric bias rather than logical necessity. But there is something else in the paper, something personal that reveals itself between the lines. The imitation game is about passing, about convincing interrogators that you are what you're pretending to be, about hiding your true nature behind convincing performance, about being questioned on your authenticity. One does not write such thought experiments in a vacuum. One writes them from experience. Alan is 38 years old, living in a country where his sexual orientation is illegal, working in institutions where discovery would mean dismissal at minimum, prosecution at worst. He has spent his entire adult life learning to pass, to perform heterosexual normalcy, convincingly enough that casual observers don't notice the gaps, the evasions, the careful construction of acceptable identity. The imitation game is theoretical computer science. It is also autobiography. The paper includes a remarkable section on how machines might learn, not by programming every possible response. That would be impossibly complex, rigid, unable to handle novel situations. Instead, by creating systems that learn from experience, that improve through practice, that develop knowledge through interaction with their environment. He calls it the child-machine approach. Build a machine with the intellectual capacities of a child. Not a sophisticated adult mind, but the raw potential for learning. Then educate it. Expose it to language, to problems, to feedback that shapes its responses. Reward correct behavior, correct errors. Allow it to develop understanding through accumulated experience. Just as human children become intelligent adults through years of learning rather than being born with complete knowledge. It is a prescient vision of machine learning, sketched in 1950, when computers can barely multiply numbers reliably, when memory is measured in kilobytes, when the very concept of artificial intelligence as a field doesn't yet exist. Alan is describing neural networks, reinforcement learning, the fundamental approach that will eventually produce systems that play chess and Go at superhuman levels, that translate languages, that generate text and images, that begin to exhibit capabilities that look disturbingly like general intelligence. But in 1950, it reads like science fiction, like philosophy rather than engineering, like the speculations of someone who has confused possibility with practicality. The Times publishes skeptical coverage. Scientists write rebuttals. Philosophers object to the reduction of thought to mechanical process, the conflation of behavior with consciousness, the apparent dismissal of human uniqueness. Religious thinkers are offended by the suggestion that souls and machines might not be mutually exclusive categories. The public, to the extent they notice at all, finds the whole discussion faintly absurd. Thinking machines? Ridiculous. Machines are tools. Humans are humans. The categories are not confusable. A few people, a very few. Read the paper and see what Alan sees. Not tomorrow, not soon, but coming. The shape of a future where the boundaries between human and machine intelligence become negotiable, where consciousness might be substrate independent, where the question, can machines think, becomes as meaningless as asking whether submarines can swim. At Manchester, Alan continues programming the computer. He writes a program to generate love letters, random combinations of romantic phrases, grammatically correct but semantically absurd. Darling sweetheart, you are my avid fellow feeling. My affection curiously clings to your passionate wish. My liking yearns for your heart. Yours beautifully, MUC. The program is half joke, half proof of concept. Language as combinatorial process. Meaning as pattern recognition. Human communication reduced to algorithms and randomness. He writes programs to play chess, to solve mathematical puzzles, to generate music. None of them work particularly well. The Manchester machine is too small, too slow, too limited in memory. But the principles are sound. The vision is clear. Give it time. Give it better hardware. Give it more sophisticated algorithms. The future is visible from here, even if the path remains long. In his office, surrounded by printouts and technical manuals, Alan sits and thinks about minds. His own mind, which has always felt slightly alien to the social world it inhabits. The minds of others, which he must infer from behavior, since he has no direct access to their inner experience. The potential minds of machines, which might someday fool interrogators, past the imitation game, demonstrate intelligence in ways that force us to reconsider what intelligence means. In quiet moments, he wonders if he himself is simply a more complex version of the same thing, a biological machine, executing algorithms shaped by evolution and experience, creating the illusion of free will through sufficient complexity. The thought is not despairing, just observational. Mind as mechanism, consciousness as computation. Perhaps there is beauty in it, this reduction of the mysterious to the mathematically tractable. But he cannot escape the irony. He has spent his life trying to make machines that can pass as human, and he has spent his life trying to pass as a different kind of human than he is. The interrogation never ends. The performance is always being evaluated. One wrong answer, one revealing slip, and the game is over. He is brilliant at making machines think. He is terrible at pretending to be what he's not. Eventually, inevitably, the pretense will fail. By 1951, Alan's interests are fragmenting across multiple domains, following the associative logic of a mind that sees connections others miss. He is still working on computer programming, still thinking about machine intelligence. But increasingly, he is drawn to biology, specifically to the question of morphogenesis. How do organisms develop? How does a fertilized egg, a single, undifferentiated cell, become a complex multicellular creature with distinct organs, symmetric structures, repeated patterns? The question has mathematical dimensions. Consider the leopard spots, the zebra's stripes, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, following the Fibonacci sequence, the radial symmetry of starfish. These are not random. They follow rules. But what rules? What process takes initially uniform tissue and creates differentiated pattern structures? Alan proposes a mechanism: reaction diffusion. Imagine two chemicals, he calls them morphogens, that interact with each other and diffuse through tissue at different rates. One chemical activates growth or pigmentation, the other inhibits it. When these chemicals interact according to relatively simple rules, spreading and reacting and influencing each other, they spontaneously generate complex, stable patterns. It is characteristic of his thinking. Reduce the complex to simple mechanical rules, then show how complexity emerges from iteration and interaction. The same approach he used with Turing machines. Simple operations repeated endlessly, producing sophisticated results. He writes the mathematics carefully, deriving differential equations that describe how morphogen concentrations change over time and space. Then he does something unusual. He tests the theory computationally. He programs the Manchester computer to simulate reaction diffusion systems, watching as spots and stripes appear on the screen from initially random distributions of chemicals. The patterns are stable, repeating, recognizably similar to patterns found in nature. The paper, The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, is published in 1952 in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It is dense, mathematical, illustrated with hand-drawn diagrams and computational outputs. It anticipates by decades the field of computational biology, the use of computers to model developmental processes, the understanding that biological pattern formation follows mathematical laws, but in 1952, it is mostly ignored. Biologists don't speak the language of differential equations and computational simulation. Mathematicians don't think biology is a proper mathematical subject. The paper falls between disciplines, appreciated by neither, filed away in libraries, where it will gather dust for 20 years, before being rediscovered and recognized as foundational. Alan doesn't seem particularly bothered. He keeps working on the problems that interest him, unconcerned with recognition or professional advancement. He is a reader in the theory of computing at Manchester, a respectable position, but not prestigious, not a full professorship. not the kind of appointment his contributions might justify if they were properly understood. But he has a salary. He has access to the computer. He has freedom to pursue whatever questions attract his attention. What more does he need? He runs, still runs, in his 40s now. Slower than he was, but still competitive. Cross-country races, marathons, long solitary training. Runs through the Cheshire countryside. In 1947, he nearly made the British Olympic team, missing qualification by a narrow margin. His best marathon time, 2 hours, 46 minutes, is a world class for an amateur. Running is one of the few things where his body's awkwardness disappears, where motion becomes efficient and natural, where there is no performance required, no social navigation, just legs and lungs, and the road stretching ahead. After runs, he sits in his small house in Wilmslow, a suburban town outside Manchester, and thinks. The house is modest, semi-detached, indistinguishable from its neighbors except for the disorder inside. Books everywhere, papers stacked on every surface, dishes unwashed in the sink. He is not domestic. He does not care about appearances. The house is functional shelter, nothing more. He has relationships. Quiet, careful, illegal relationships with men who share his inclinations and his risks. He meets them in Manchester, in pubs where certain populations gather, where understanding passes without explicit statement. The relationships are not long-term. They cannot be, given the legal and social constraints. But they provide moments of connection, of being seen fully rather than partially, of not having to perform heterosexual normalcy for hours or days at a time. He is not ashamed. This is important to understand. Alan has never internalized the social judgment about homosexuality. He knows it is illegal. He knows it is considered deviant, sinful, evidence of psychological disorder. But intellectually, he cannot accept these judgments. They rest on religious dogma he doesn't believe, on moral assertions unsupported by logic, on classifications that seem arbitrary and cruel. So he is careful, but not paranoid, discreet, but not self-loathing. He wants what everyone wants, to be known fully and loved anyway, to have relationships that aren't shadowed by secrecy and shame, to exist in the world without pretense. It is a dangerous thing to want in 1950s Britain. The Cold War is intensifying. Security services are obsessed with loyalty, with Soviet infiltration, with the possibility that vulnerable individuals might be blackmailed into betrayal, and homosexuals are classified as inherently vulnerable, blackmailable, security risks, men lose jobs over rumors. Prosecutions are increasing. The government launches a moral crusade, encouraged by newspapers that run sensational stories about degenerate perverts corrupting youth. Alan knows this, reads the newspapers, sees the prosecutions. But some part of him, the part that has never been good at social calculation, that speaks truthfully when lies would be prudent, cannot fully internalize the danger. He is careful about whom he tells, but he does not live in constant fear. He continues to meet people, to form attachments, to act on desires that the law considers criminal. In December 1951, he meets Arnold Murray, 19 years old, working class, unemployed. They meet outside a cinema in Manchester. There is attraction, conversation, an invitation back to Alan's house in Wilmslow. They begin a relationship, casual, intermittent, not particularly serious on either side. Arnold stays over occasionally. They talk, have sex, share meals. Alan gives him small amounts of money sometimes, not as payment, but as help, the way one might help a friend who's struggling financially. It is ordinary, mundane, the kind of relationship happening all over Britain kept quiet but not unusual, except that it is illegal, except that Alan is a government scientist with security clearance, except that one careless moment, one unlucky circumstance, can transform ordinary life into criminal prosecution. In January 1952, Alan's house is burgled. Small items taken, clothes, some personal effects, nothing valuable. He reports it to police. During the investigation, details emerge. Arnold mentions knowing who might have done it, an acquaintance of his, someone he complained to about Alan's relative prosperity. The police ask questions. How do you know Arnold Murray? How does he have access to your house? What is the nature of your relationship? Alan does not lie well, has never lied well. Under questioning, faced with direct questions about factual events, he confirms the relationship. Yes, Arnold has stayed at his house. Yes, they are intimate. Yes, he understands this is illegal. But no, he does not believe he has done anything morally wrong. The police see it differently. This is not a burglary investigation anymore. This is a gross indecency case. Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, 1885, the same statute used to convict Oscar Wilde in 1895, designed to criminalize male homosexuality in all forms, not just penetrative acts, but any gross indecency between men. The penalty can be up to 2 years, imprisonment with hard labor. In February 1952, Alan Turing is arrested and charged with gross indecency. Arnold Murray is charged as well. They will be tried separately. Their lives, already constrained by law and custom, are about to be systematically dismantled. The preliminary hearings happen in late February 1952 in Wilmslow. A small courtroom, wood-paneled, cold despite the radiators. Alan appears in ordinary clothes, a slightly rumpled suit, the collar not quite straight. He is 40 years old and looks older, hair thinning, the softness of middle age settling over features that were never particularly striking. The charges are read. Gross indecency. Multiple counts, multiple dates. Acts committed with Arnold Murray at Alan's residence in Wilmslow. The prosecution presents evidence, statements from both men, testimonies about their relationship, details that transform private intimacy into legal exhibits. Arnold, testifying to secure a lighter sentence, confirms everything. Yes, the relationship was sexual. Yes, it happened multiple times. Yes, Dr. Turing initiated contact. Alan's solicitor advises him to plead not guilty, to contest the charges, to force the prosecution to prove its case. But Alan refuses. He sees no point in lying about factual events. The relationship occurred. The acts took place. Denying them would be dishonest. And Alan has never been comfortable with dishonesty, even strategic dishonesty that serves self-interest. At his trial in March, held at the Cheshire Quarter Sessions, Alan pleads guilty to all charges. His defense counsel makes what arguments are possible. Dr. Turing is a distinguished scientist, a man of exceptional intellectual gifts, not a predatory deviant, but someone who formed a relationship with a consenting adult. There was no corruption of youth. Murray was 19, legally adult. There was no public indecency. Everything happened privately in Alan's home. The relationship has ended. Dr. Turing recognizes it was illegal and regrets the transgression. The judge listens with the expression of someone tasting something distasteful. His comments from the bench make clear his view. Homosexuality is a perversion, a disease, a moral failing that threatens the fabric of decent society. But Dr. Turing is an educated man, a scientist, potentially capable of rehabilitation if properly treated. He offers a choice, imprisonment, or probation with mandatory treatment. Chemical castration through hormone injections. A course of synthetic estrogen designed to suppress libido, to cure homosexual desire through forced alteration of the body's hormonal balance. Alan chooses the treatment. The calculation is pragmatic. Probation allows him to continue working. Prison would mean losing his position at Manchester, losing access to the computer, losing the ability to pursue the work that matters to him. And the treatment is supposedly temporary. 1 year of injections, then it ends. He can endure 1 year. The injections begin in April 1952. Stilbostrol, synthetic estrogen administered in doses, designed to suppress testosterone production. The effects are immediate and profound. Breast development, fat redistribution, loss of muscle mass, sexual function disrupted, mood swings, emotional volatility, a general sense of being chemically wrong, of having his physiology forcibly altered against its nature. He writes to friends with dark humor about the effects. Growing breasts, he jokes. At least he's experiencing what women deal with. But underneath the jokes, there is something else. A careful documentation of being chemically altered against the grain of one's nature. He continues attending lectures, programming the computer, working on morphogenesis, but colleagues notice changes. Not just physical, though those become increasingly obvious, embarrassing, difficult to ignore, but a kind of withdrawal, a dimming of the enthusiasms that previously animated him. His security clearance is revoked. The work at Bletchley, still classified, still officially unacknowledged, now marks him as a security risk. Homosexuals are considered vulnerable to blackmail, susceptible to Soviet recruitment, unreliable. Never mind that Alan helped save Britain during the war. Never mind his contributions to computer science, cryptography, mathematics. He loves men, therefore he cannot be trusted. Government agents come to interview his colleagues. Is Dr. Turing reliable? Has he exhibited suspicious behavior? Does he associate with unsavory individuals? The message is clear. He is under surveillance. His movements are monitored. His associations are noted. The government he helped save now watches him as a potential threat to national security. He cannot travel freely. A planned trip to Norway is cancelled after his visa. Application triggers security concerns. He had been invited to give lectures on computer science. But homosexuals traveling alone to foreign countries, particularly Scandinavian countries known for more liberal attitudes, raise red flags. Potential defection risk. Potential intelligence compromise. The invitation is withdrawn. Friends notice changes beyond the physical. He becomes more isolated, less likely to accept social invitations, less willing to engage in the long, meandering conversations about mathematics and philosophy that previously delighted him. It is as if some core energy has been depleted, leaving only the habits of intellectual engagement without the underlying vitality. But he keeps working. What else is there? The morphogenesis paper is published. He gives the lectures to the local astronomical society about computers and thinking machines. He corresponds with mathematicians about unsolved problems in number theory. He programs the Manchester computer, developing more sophisticated algorithms, exploring the limits of what the machine can accomplish. In April 1953, the hormone treatment ends. 1 year completed. His body begins slowly returning toward its previous state. Though some changes are permanent, the breast tissue remains, the fat distribution persists, but testosterone levels rise, libido returns. The emotional fog lifts somewhat. He resumes running, training seriously again, pushing his body to exhaustion, trying to reclaim physical competence after a year of chemical disruption. The running is therapy, meditation, proof that his body can still do what it was designed for, even after being forcibly altered. He begins new work on philosophical questions about machine intelligence, about whether consciousness requires specific substrate or can emerge from any sufficiently complex information processing system. He sketches ideas about quantum mechanics and biology, wondering if quantum effects might play a role in consciousness, in how organisms develop, in processes that seem to transcend classical physics. From the outside, to colleagues who don't know the details, he might seem to be recovering, resuming normal productivity, getting on with a life after an unfortunate legal trouble that everyone agrees is best not discussed. But people who know him better see something else. A brittleness that wasn't there before, a sense of being always slightly on guard, performing normalcy rather than inhabiting it naturally. The trial and treatment have changed something fundamental, not his intellect, which remains as sharp as ever, but his relationship to the world he inhabits. The trust that things will work out, that honesty is rewarded, that brilliant contributions earn protection. That trust is gone. He is 41 years old. He has revolutionized computer science, saved countless lives during the war, pioneered fields that won't be properly recognized for decades. And his government has prosecuted him for loving men, chemically castrated him for being honest about his nature, classified him as a security risk for having the identity he's always had. The injustice is not abstract. It is daily, physical, carved into his body through hormone injections, enforced through surveillance and revoked privileges, and the knowledge that he lives at the sufferance of a society that considers him deviant. He continues, because what else is there? Because work remains. Because problems still need solving. Because giving up would mean letting them win, and Alan has never been good at surrendering. But something has broken that will not mend. Spring, 1954 arrives cold and late. The Cheshire countryside is slow to green. Alan's garden in Wilmslow is neglected. Weeds growing unchecked, grass unmowed. The apple tree in the corner bare-branched and waiting for warmth that hasn't come. He has never been particularly interested in gardening. The house is shelter. The garden is land that happens to surround the shelter. But he has been experimenting in the small shed at the bottom of the garden. Electroplating experiments, trying to coat spoons with gold, dissolved in cyanide solution. It is a hobby project, something to occupy his hands while his mind works through other problems. The chemistry is straightforward. The results are mildly interesting. The process uses potassium cyanide, highly toxic, carefully stored, handled with appropriate caution, or what Alan considers appropriate caution, which is to say, not much. He has never been careful about laboratory safety. At Bletchley, he was known for eating while working, for not washing hands before meals, for general absent-mindedness about contamination. His colleagues would joke about it. Now, working alone in a garden shed with toxic chemicals, there is no one to remind him, no one to notice when he's careless. In June, his mood seems to improve slightly. He attends a lecture at the university. He goes running several times. He writes to friends about various projects. The morphogenesis work, continuing. New ideas about computer programming. Questions about whether machines might someday be considered conscious in legal and moral terms. The letters are signed with his usual signing off, nothing suggesting crisis or despair. On Monday, June 7th, his housekeeper, Mrs. Eliza Clayton, arrives in the morning to clean. She has worked for Dr. Turing for 2 years now, accustomed to his eccentricities, his disorder, his absent-minded professor habits. She lets herself in with her key. The house is quiet. Too quiet, perhaps, though she doesn't register this consciously at first. She begins her routine, tidying the sitting room where papers are scattered across every surface, moving to the kitchen where dishes have accumulated in the sink, then upstairs to make the bed, collect laundry, dust the bedroom furniture. Dr. Turing is in bed, still in bed at this hour, which is unusual. He's typically an early riser, already at the university or out running by the time she arrives. She moves closer. He's lying on his side, facing away from the door, very still. The stillness is wrong. Not sleep, something else. She calls his name, no response. She touches his shoulder. The body is cold, rigid with rigor mortis. He has been dead for hours. Since last night, most likely. Mrs. Clayton runs from the room, from the house. She finds a neighbor, makes a phone call. Police arrive within the hour. Doctor, coroner. The machinery of official response to unexpected death. The scene they document. Alan Turing, age 41. Dead in bed, in his home, at 43 Adlington Road, Wilmslow. Foam around the mouth, consistent with cyanide poisoning. On the bedside table, an apple, partially eaten, 4 bites taken from it. The apple is not tested for poison, a critical oversight that will fuel decades of speculation. But the autopsy reveals significant cyanide in his system. Potassium cyanide, the same chemical he'd been using in his electroplating experiments. The coroner's inquest is held quickly. Evidence presented. Dr. Turing's history, the conviction for gross indecency, the hormone treatment, the professional setbacks, testimony from acquaintances about his mood in recent weeks. No obvious signs of crisis. But then, he was always somewhat opaque, difficult to read. The presence of cyanide in his home laboratory, the half-eaten apple beside the bed, the verdict, suicide while the balance of his mind was disturbed, the standard British formulation for self-inflicted death, the phrase that allows Christian burial, that softens the judgment slightly, not sane suicide but disturbed suicide, not fully responsible, diminished by circumstance. The newspapers report it briefly. Dr. A. M. Turing found dead in his home. A scientist at Manchester University. Some papers mention the conviction, carefully worded to avoid libel. A criminal offense. Troubles with the law. Coded language that readers understand. Most don't mention his war work, still classified. Few note his contributions to computing, not yet recognized as revolutionary. His mother, Sarah Turing, refuses to believe it was suicide. An accident, she insists. Her son was careless with chemicals, prone to eating apples while working, unconcerned with safety protocols. He'd been in good spirits recently, making plans, looking forward to projects, not the behavior of someone contemplating death. Friends are divided. Some see the suicide verdict as obvious. A persecuted man, chemically castrated, professionally ruined, facing a future of continued surveillance and social stigma. Why wouldn't he choose to end it? Others remember his resilience, his dark humor, about the hormone treatment, his continued engagement with work. Alan had endured worse and continued. Why now? The truth, like so much about Alan, remains ambiguous. The evidence supports suicide. He had means, motive, and the apple beside his bed suggests a method chosen deliberately. Poison, fairy tale symbolism, Snow White, and the eternal sleep. A mathematician's suicide, referential and literary. But the evidence also supports accident. He was notoriously careless in his home laboratory. The apple was his habitual evening snack. Cyanide can contaminate surfaces and remain there. The dose could have been accidental exposure rather than deliberate ingestion. No suicide note was found. His behavior in preceding days showed no clear warning signs. Perhaps the ambiguity is fitting. Alan spent his life proving the limits of decidability, showing that some questions cannot be answered with certainty, no matter how much information is available. His death remains undecidable, a problem that resists solution, that different observers read differently depending on their assumptions and interpretations. What is certain, on June 7th, 1954, Alan Matheson Turing dies alone in his house in Wilmslow. He is 41 years old. The future he envisioned, machines that think, computers that learn, intelligence unbound from biological substrate, will arrive without him. The recognition he deserved, for Bletchley Park, for theoretical computer science, for pioneering work across multiple fields, will come decades too late. The funeral is held June 12th at Woking Crematorium, a small service his mother attends, stone-faced, refusing to accept suicide. His brother John, a handful of colleagues from Manchester, friends from Cambridge, people who knew fragments of him, the mathematician, the runner, the computer scientist, the codebreaker, but perhaps no one who knew all of him, who understood the full complexity of trying to exist as Alan Turing in mid-century Britain. There is no military honor guard, no government recognition, no mention of his war service, still classified, still officially secret. The man who helped save Britain from Nazi Germany is cremated with less ceremony than many far lesser contributors receive. His ashes are scattered in the gardens at Woking. No headstone, no monument, no marker to indicate that someone extraordinary passed through the world and left it transformed. The Manchester Computer Laboratory continues without him. The morphogenesis work is noted by a few biologists, but mostly forgotten. The Computing Machinery and Intelligence paper is read by specialists in artificial intelligence, a field that is just beginning to coalesce, but makes little impact on broader culture. The Bletchley Park work remains classified. The official history of computing credits American engineers, the ENIAC team, von Neumann. Alan's name appears in technical bibliographies, but means little to the general public. It is as if he is being erased. Not deliberately, no conspiracy, no malice, but through the accumulated effect of secrecy, indifference, and the way history forgets people who die before their contributions are recognized. He is a footnote, a minor figure, someone who did important work, but died young and is gradually forgotten, as his contemporaries age and die, and the direct memory of him fades. But the machines keep running, at Manchester, at Cambridge, at laboratories across Britain and America. The stored program computers he helped pioneer continue to develop. Programming techniques improve, memory increases, processing speeds accelerate. The trajectory he predicted, machines that can simulate any other machine, that can be taught to perform intellectual tasks previously considered exclusively human, continues exactly as he described. The 1960s arrive. Computers become commercial products. IBM and others build machines for business use. Programming becomes a profession. The concept of software as distinct from hardware becomes standard. Everything Alan described in his ACE proposal becomes engineering reality, implemented by people who may not know his name, but are following the blueprint he created. The 1970s. Personal computers begin to emerge. Hobbyists building machines in garages. The microprocessor makes computation small and cheap. Alan's vision of universal machines, accessible to individuals rather than locked in corporate or military installations, starts to materialize. The 1980s. Computers enter homes, schools, libraries. The tools of computation democratize. Programming languages become more sophisticated. The question of machine intelligence remains theoretical, but less, obviously, absurd. Expert systems, early neural networks, attempts at natural language processing, all following paths Alan sketched decades earlier. And gradually, very gradually, recognition begins to accumulate. The declassification comes in pieces, spread across decades. In the 1970s, the British government begins releasing information about Bletchley Park. Books are published by former codebreakers, finally allowed to discuss their war work. Alan's name appears, not prominently at first, but present. The architect of the bomb, the mathematician who broke naval Enigma, the man whose work saved convoys in the Atlantic. Historians start investigating. Andrew Hodges begins researching a biography in the late 1970s, interviewing surviving colleagues, piecing together the classified work and the personal life and the tragic end. The biography, Alan Turing, The Enigma, is published in 1983. It is comprehensive, sympathetic, determined to present the whole person rather than sanitize fragments. The homosexuality is not hidden or euphemized. The prosecution is described as the injustice it was. The scientific contributions are explained for general readers. The book finds an audience. Computer scientists read it and realize the origins of their field run through this one man more than that they'd understood. LGBTQ activists read it and see a martyr to unjust laws, a brilliant life destroyed by legal persecution. The general public begins to learn who Alan Turing was, what he accomplished, what was done to him. The 1990s bring growing recognition. The Association for Computing Machinery establishes the Turing Award in 1966, computing's equivalent of the Nobel Prize, though it takes decades before the public knows why it's named for Turing. His papers are studied as foundational texts. The Turing test becomes the standard thought experiment for discussions of artificial intelligence. Computer science departments teach the Turing machine as the theoretical basis for computation. But official recognition lags behind academic and cultural recognition. The British government remains silent about the injustice of his prosecution. The conviction stands. The persecution remains unjudged. Alan is celebrated for his scientific contributions, while his treatment by the state goes unacknowledged. In 2009, 55 years after his death, Prime Minister Gordon Brown issues an official apology on behalf of the British government. The statement acknowledges the appalling treatment Turing received, describes his contributions to the war effort and to computer science, and apologizes for a society that persecuted rather than celebrated him. "We're sorry," Brown writes. "You deserved so much better." It is inadequate, of course. Words cannot undo chemical castration, cannot restore the years lost, cannot bring Alan back to see the world he helped create. But it is something. Official acknowledgement that the state was wrong, that Alan was wronged, that the laws and attitudes that destroyed him were unjust. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II grants Alan a posthumous royal pardon. The conviction for gross indecency is formally overturned. Not because the acts didn't happen, they did, but because the law itself was unjust, should never have existed, should never have been applied. The pardon is controversial. Some argue it implies guilt that needs forgiving rather than innocence wrongly punished. Others point out that thousands of other men convicted under the same laws received no pardons, no apologies. Why is Alan special? The answer, uncomfortable but true, because he was useful, because his contributions are now recognized as historically significant, because power pardons the brilliant more readily than the ordinary. The injustice was universal. All men prosecuted for homosexuality were wronged, not just the ones who happened to invent computer science. But power offers individual exceptions rather than systemic corrections. In 2017, the Alan Turing Law is passed, granting posthumous pardons to all British men convicted under historical anti-homosexuality legislation. It is a broader correction, though still inadequate, posthumous pardons for the dead, but nothing for the living who carry those convictions, whose lives were damaged by unjust laws. Statues are erected at Bletchley Park, where a museum now explains the code-breaking work to tourists, at the University of Manchester, where he developed early computing, in Sackville Gardens in Manchester's gay village, a statue of Alan sitting on a bench, holding an apple, the ambiguous symbol of his death now reclaimed as memorial. Visitors sit beside him, take photographs, leave flowers. In 2014, The Imitation Game is released, a Hollywood film starring Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan. It is dramatized, compressed, and simplified for mainstream audiences. Some facts are changed for narrative convenience, but millions of people watch it. Millions learn his name, learn roughly what he accomplished, learn that he was persecuted for being gay. The film is flawed but effective. Alan enters popular consciousness. Tech companies name buildings after him. Computer science conferences invoke his name. LGBTQ organizations celebrate him as a symbol of brilliance destroyed by bigotry. He becomes an icon, not the person, necessarily, but the representation. The gay martyr, the unrecognized genius, the man ahead of his time. But symbols are not people. The real Alan remains somehow distant, obscured by recognition and interpretation, and the sheer weight of significance placed on his life. He was not fighting for future causes. He was simply trying to live honestly in the present he inhabited. He was not building computers to be remembered. He was building them because the ideas were interesting and the problems were solvable, and working with one's hands on complex systems brings a particular kind of satisfaction. What remains beyond the awards and the apologies and the statues is a shape, an outline of a mind that saw patterns others missed, that asked questions no one else thought to ask, that moved through the world, slightly out of phase with its rhythms and expectations. A boy who counted wallpaper flowers in empty houses, trying to make sense of a world that seemed arbitrary and unkind. A young man who imagined machines that could think before anyone else believed thinking was something machines could do. A codebreaker who sat in unheated huts, processing encrypted messages while U-boats prowled the Atlantic and sailors died in freezing water. A runner who pushed his body to exhaustion because motion quieted thought and running was honest in ways human interaction was not. A scientist who wondered if zebras' stripes could be explained by differential equations, if consciousness might emerge from any sufficiently complex system, if the boundaries between human and machine were less rigid than people assumed. A person who loved unwisely and honestly in a time that punished both wisdom and honesty, who refused to lie about his nature even when lies would have been safer, who chose truth over survival and was destroyed for that choice. The world caught up eventually, too late for Alan, but caught up nonetheless. Somewhere in the archives at King's College, Cambridge, there are photographs. Alan in running shorts, grinning after a marathon, looking younger than his years, pleased with his time. Alan at Bletchley, distracted, thinking about something just outside the frame. Alan with colleagues at Manchester, slightly apart even when physically present, attention already moving toward the next problem. In the photographs, he is always looking just past the camera, towards something the photographer cannot see. The next question, the next pattern, the future that exists in his mind but not yet in the world. That future is now our present. Every search query, every algorithm, every device that computes, every neural network learning from data, Every attempt to build artificial intelligence, every discussion about whether machines can think, all of it carries the trace of his thinking, follows paths he marked out when the territory was unmapped, and most observers couldn't even see that territory existed. We live in the world Alan Turing built, in theory, while the century that contained him tried, in every way it could devise, to make him smaller, quieter, less himself. We carry computers in our pockets more powerful than anything that existed when he died. We ask machines questions and receive intelligent-seeming answers. We debate whether artificial systems are truly conscious or merely simulating consciousness. The same debate Alan framed in 1950, still unresolved, still urgent. He saw what was coming. He just did not live to see himself arrive. The light through the archive windows shifts as afternoon becomes evening. The documents return to their boxes. The photographs are filed away. The story continues, incomplete, like all stories about people who die before their time. Which is to say, like all stories about people who were simply born too early for the world they carried inside them. Outside, evening falls over Cambridge, over Manchester, over Wilmslow, where he died alone, over Bletchley Park, where the huts still stand, preserved now as museum pieces, sites where the future was invented in secret by people who couldn't tell anyone what they'd done. Somewhere, computers are running. Millions of them. Billions of them. Processing queries, running algorithms, executing the stored programs that Alan described theoretically, before anyone built them physically. The universal machine, replicated beyond counting, embedded in infrastructure and devices and systems that touch every aspect of modern life. Somewhere, patterns are emerging from chaos, in biological simulations, in models of development and morphogenesis, in systems that learn from experience and improve through practice. The reaction-diffusion equations Alan derived are standard now in computational biology, used to understand how organisms develop, how patterns form, how complexity emerges from simple rules, iterated endlessly. Somewhere, researchers are pushing toward artificial general intelligence, trying to build systems that can think flexibly across domains, that can learn like children learn, that might someday pass the imitation game, not through tricks, but through genuine understanding. They cite Alan's papers, they invoke his name, they follow the blueprint he sketched 70 years ago, refined with decades of engineering progress, but fundamentally unchanged in its logic. The work continues without him, because of him, in the direction he indicated with equations and intuition, and a stubborn refusal to accept that mechanical thought was impossible, that machines were merely tools, that human intelligence was somehow categorically different from any other form of information processing. He was right about the computers, right about machine learning, right about the possibility of artificial intelligence, right about the mathematical foundations of biological pattern formation, right about nearly everything except his own survival. That calculation he got wrong. Or perhaps he got it right and chose truth anyway, knowing the cost, deciding some equations have no solution, that preserves both integrity and safety. The story ends here, in archives and museums and the accumulated text of recognition that comes too late. The man is gone, the architecture remains. The ideas propagate forward through time, implemented by people who may not know his name but inherit his vision. And we, living in the computational age he envisioned, carrying thinking machines in our pockets, debating machine consciousness and artificial intelligence and whether algorithms can be creative. We are his legacy, wanted or not. We inhabit the future he described while the present destroyed him for being inconveniently himself. The greatest tragedy is not that he died at 41. The greatest tragedy is that he was right. About everything. About the machines, about their potential, about what the world would become. He saw clearly across decades, mapped the territory with precision, built the theoretical foundations that others would use to construct the future. And the world he saw so clearly, the world we now inhabit, arrived without him. Too late to save him, too late to say, "You were right," about the machines, about intelligence, about all of it. He is still waiting for recognition in a sense, still ahead of us, still asking questions we haven't fully answered, proposing possibilities we haven't fully explored, seeing connections we haven't quite grasped. The interrogation continues. The imitation game persists. Can machines think? Can consciousness emerge from computation? Can intelligence be substrate independent? We are still working through the implications of questions Alan posed before anyone else understood. They were questions worth asking. He was a 21st century mind trapped in the 20th century. His ideas were too early. His identity was punished. And the world that wasn't ready for him eventually became the world he predicted. A world of thinking machines and computational biology and artificial intelligence, gradually approaching human capability. But Alan isn't here to see it. He is 41 years old forever, dead in a house in Wilmslow, with a half-eaten apple beside his bed. The ambiguous ending to an extraordinary life that the world was not ready for and could not protect. The future arrived. He didn't. That's the story. That's the tragedy. That's the shape of a genius born too soon, destroyed too easily, recognized too late. The man the world wasn't ready for. Alan Matheson Turing, 1912 to 1954. Gone but persistent, like a program running in the background of everything we do with computers, with algorithms, with artificial minds we're still learning to build. He saw the future, he built its foundations. He died before it arrived, and now we live in the world he imagined, and he is not here to see it. And that absence, that unfilled space where he should be, celebrating, correcting, extending, asking new questions, that absence is the true measure of what was lost, when the world that wasn't ready for him destroyed him for being exactly who he was. The archive closes, the lights go out, the story ends, but the work continues. Always.